you so much for coming out on this beautiful day when you could be out there enjoying the weather, and instead talking about national security, which actually is extraordinarily important, particularly at this point in time in our country's history, with so much evil out there. And when you stop and you look at this country and how it was created, you look at some of our founding documents, you look at our Constitution, you realize that one of the primary goals of government in America is to protect we the people. That's absolutely critical. And we need protection. You know, FBI Director Comey said right after the 4th of July this year that there have been several thwarted ISIS-inspired attempts in New York, New Jersey, North Carolina to create havoc in this country. So there are people out there who very much want to do something to us. And unfortunately, you know, the policy in the last several years in this country, foreign policy has pretty much been one of reacting to what other people do and appeasement. And I do not believe that that is the appropriate position for the world's superpower. I think we have to have a very proactive foreign policy. And, you know, we have to sort of reject this ideal of soft power, which the administration has put forth. If we give them jobs and if we're nice to them, you know, they'll be nice to us and we can all sit around the fire and sing Kumbaya. But, you know, it doesn't actually work that way because, you know, I'm not sure that people who come up with policies like that in the current world fully understand that not everybody is like we are. You know, they all have, you know, different philosophies. You know, I've personally had an opportunity to visit 57 countries, talked to many heads of states, lived abroad, and I've discovered that not everybody thinks the way Americans think. There's no question about that. You have to really understand who they are. You have to understand how jihadists think. Their ideal is very different than our ideal. And, you know, for them, you know, nirvana, you know, getting killed in battle so you can go to heaven and have 72 virgins, you know. You probably heard about the jihadist who died and went to heaven, and when he got there were all these people kicking him and stomping him. And he said to St. Peter, I thought I was supposed to get 72 virgins. He said, no, that's 72 Virginians. But, but you know, there are different things that motivate people, you know, they just don't know. But one thing that is so important right now in this world is for our allies to know that we support them, that they are our friends. You know, Israel needs to know that. You know, Ukraine needs to know that. Because, you know, other countries are looking at how we treat our allies. And they say, well, if they treat them that way, how will they treat us? And at the same time, our enemies are looking at us and they're saying, those guys are paper tigers. You know, they don't mean what they say, they don't say what they mean. You can push them around. And I think that's really an extremely dangerous situation when people begin to doubt you. Even if you are strong, if people doubt you, you're going to be challenged and you're going to create a more dangerous environment. And, you know, when a thief comes around at nighttime looking for a place to rob, he looks for a place that's weak. He doesn't look for a place that has a fortified fence and a guard dog and, you know, guards with, you know, AK-47s. He'd rather have a place that has no fence and a couple of drunks. Well, you know, Iowa will benefit as the United States benefits. And, you know, we probably cannot take each of our individual situations. We have to put that under the umbrella of what works for the entire United States. And, you know, China will respond appropriately to power. You know, they are very pragmatic people. And when they see weakness, they will also take advantage of it. So the way we really fix that is we shore up our areas of weakness. The natural consequences of that will be good for us, and I think that will ultimately be good for Iowa as well.
And do you think military confrontation with China is inevitable?
I do not think military, again, because I said they're pragmatic people. And what they're doing now is a natural consequence of us not leading. Someone is always going to fill in the void if you don't lead. So, you know, let's not demonize them for doing what they're doing. They're just taking advantage of a weak spot.
Well, and you know, as you pointed out, some of your introductory comments, I'll use this phrase, some of the hollowing out that we've seen of our military, with our planes being cannibalized to make sure they can stay in the air. The shrinking down of our Navy while China is building theirs up.
And our nuclear arsenal is archaic, while Putin is steadily working on his. We've basically abandoned our space program, which I think is a terrible thing, because look at all the wonderful things that improve our lives that came from the space program. It doesn't have anything to do with people walking on the moon. It has to do with technology that is developed that helps us. And also, we need to be in space. You know, we have to pay them $77 million for one of our people to go up there. They control that area. We can't allow that. We have to be able to control that, because we have to be able to see when somebody launches a nuclear weapon from any place in the world. We need to be able to disable it, and we need to be able to attack them. It's not just a matter of being nice. When people attack us, we need to respond in a way that the first one who does it becomes a real example for everybody else.
Well, and I think most Iowans, if you were to ask them, what they thought warfare was in space right now, for a generation or two, Americans control space. We don't. And as you talk about those pragmatic decisions that we have to make as a people at a time when we're also dealing with incredible budget deficits and spending in Washington. Perhaps you could talk a little bit about how you'll balance those priorities of needing to rebuild a military that can aggressively take on those threats, be they land, air, or space. At the same time, we're trying to deal with other budgetary concerns.
Yeah. Well, there's no question that our budgetary malfeasance is as big a threat as anything else in the world right now. But the good thing is it's fixable. We possess the most powerful economic engine the world has ever known in this country. But it can't work because we put all these chains of regulation around it. And because we have a tax system that is absurd. We have the highest corporate tax rate in the developed world. And consequently, we're driving the business, and we're driving the entrepreneurship, we're driving all those things away from us. So we need to obviously reverse those things. There's a lot of things we can do. That's a whole other conversation. But it's not complex. I think we can turn the economy around pretty quickly. It's almost like there are those who don't want it to turn around. When I look at some of the things that are being done right now. That is crucial, because that releases a lot of money. We also have to recognize that our government wastes incredible amounts of money. Our government owns 900,000 buildings, 77,000 of which are not utilized or underutilized. At the same time, we lease from the private sector over 500 million square feet of office space. That doesn't make any sense. And the list of things that we do that doesn't make any sense is unimaginable.
Yeah, we don't have that kind of time now.
But that will, we turn some of those things around, it will generate the cash that we need to rapidly fix our military force. It's going to require at least $600 billion.
$600 billion. Now, how do you approach the kind of the rapidly changing pace of warfare, where the United States has always had a technological advantage? I think we all would agree that when it comes to a fight, none of us want a fair fight, and we want to maintain that edge. Right? But now you see nation-state actors beginning to engage in cyber threats, cyber terror, whether it's a nation-state actor disabling a multi-billion-dollar American corporation, whether it's hacking into the personnel records of over 20 million federal employees, some of which have some of the most sensitive positions in the intelligence field on the globe. How would you approach, both from an offensive capability perspective, dealing with those cyber threats from nation-state actors, and then if you would maybe expand a little bit, what is a proportional response? If somebody shoots a rocket to the northwest coast or a missile on the northwest coast of the United States, we have a pretty good sense of what the response is going to be. But what if there's a giant server that is attacked sitting in the northwest corner of the United States for a major company or government? And what would a proportional response look like in a Carson administration?
Right. Well, first of all, recognize that, we do have a lot of cyber defenses, but they're not coordinated. And a lot of our tech companies are very advanced, but they don't trust the government. So, and can you blame them, really? If we have a relationship that we establish where we have a government with some integrity, and we begin to work with private industry, not only to harden our grid and give us multiple levels there, but also in terms of cyber science, both defensive and offensive capabilities, I think you will see the progress curve go up very, very dramatically. And that's what we have to do. And we have to be able to coordinate that with our covert agencies as well, because we have to have people on the ground every place. We have to infiltrate every place so that we know what's going on and who's attacking us. And when we know that, we will disable them. That will be the appropriate response, to disable them. If they continue, then the response will be to destroy them.
Very good. And from, in reference to the intelligence community, thinking to the recruitment efforts of ISIS and other terror organizations that you referenced earlier, one thing that we're seeing is the way they celebrate their victories. On social media, you look at these videos that they produce, and it's something you'd see out of a Hollywood blockbuster movie. And they are thousands of miles away, but you could have a young man in Boston, Massachusetts, sitting there getting riled up by this. How would you approach trying to identify maybe those lone wolf recruits here domestically in a way that still balances, the Fourth Amendment rights that that any American citizen has, and where do you strike that balance in the utilizing those technology surveillance tools to not just hamper recruitment efforts by ISIS here in the homeland, but to make sure that we keep a perfect record when it comes to stopping attacks here at home?
Well, I think we have to use some common sense. I mean, if somebody is, starting to wear, a beard, and they're making all these trips to Afghanistan, and they're doing things, like the Sanaya brothers, and I would do more than just scratch my head in those situations. I'm not at all for NSA spying on Americans. That's wrong. But it is so easy to get a warrant for somebody that you have a legitimate concern about. And that's the way it should be handled. And once we have evidence of something that is going wrong, those people need to be tracked 24/7. And the minute that they do something they need to be apprehended, or if we're following them to see what they're going to do, we follow them until we get the gist of what they're going to do, and then we need to do what we can to disrupt it.
And would you, if an American citizen makes the decision to join jihad, take up arms against the American people or
As far as I'm
American
concerned, they're not an American citizen anymore.
Now here's a question. This one comes from John from Waterloo, which actually allows you to perhaps display some of your medical knowledge, Dr. Carson. This year, the United States government was not adequately prepared for the spread of Ebola. What could or should we be doing to prepare for the next outbreak, natural or man-made, when it comes to potential bioterrorism threats? And what is the role of the federal government in preparation for that?
Well, I think the role of the federal government is to use some common sense. I mean, you don't bring people who have that into this country. And that's not to say that we're not compassionate, but we have other ways of dealing with it. You know, we can establish centers outside of the country. We can establish ships, like Project Hope. We have a variety of ways of doing this thing in a reasonable way without exposing other Americans to this. And, we were fortunate with the Ebola thing. Only a few people died. With a few mistakes, very bad things could happen. So, I don't think, we have in place, the techniques that we need to fight those kind of things. What we don't have in place is common sense. And if we put that in place, along with the technology, we'll be just fine.
The Carson doctrine, common sense, right? Well, here's a couple, and I'll categorize these as somewhat of the lightning round in a couple of these questions. This comes from Bill here in Dubuque. In your view, Dr. Carson, is Edward Snowden a hero or a traitor to his country?
That's a good question. Did he provide us with important information that helped change some of the things that were going on? The answer to that is yes. If I had known what he knew, would I have done it the way he did it? No. I think there are better ways that he could have revealed this information that didn't compromise the security of the nation. So there's some components of what he did that were heroic and some components that were absolutely asinine.
This comes from Danielle and Jessup. Should we pull out of Afghanistan by the end of 2016?
If we were going to pull out of it, I wouldn't tell anybody when I was going to do it. I'm not sure we ever should have been there, to be honest with you. I know the president said it was a righteous war, but the problem with Afghanistan is it's not a single government. It's 300 tribal leaders. That's always been the trouble with Afghanistan. That's why no one's ever been able to do anything. Why would we think that we were going to be able to do it? That was stupid. Doesn't mean that we can't go into Afghanistan with drones and with other technologies and wipe out a camp if we know where it is. But, the rest of it was bound to turn out the way that it did.
I'd like to turn back to, today's headlines, if we can, relative to what's happening in Iran and the deal, as I will charitably describe that. When it comes to the region, what are the things that concern you the most, and is there a priority order as to whether it's the fraying of the allies, the relationship with allies such as the Sunni-led nations who have considerable concern of the Shia-led Tehran now